monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is...
The music had already begun. Guards stood motionless beneath the vaulted entrance. Officials held their marked schedules, and the first members of the rehearsal procession were preparing to advance. Then William, Prince of Wales, looked toward the entry line and saw several faces he had never approved. His expression changed instantly. He stepped away from his assigned position, raised one hand, and ordered the entire coronation rehearsal to stop before Camilla's circle could enter. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not hesitate. The coronation rehearsal, the full practice for the ceremony in which the sovereign is formally crowned, had been timed precisely, with clergy, military officers, palace aides, and senior royals moving according to one approved procession plan. Yet the prince saw people inside the official entry line whose names had never appeared on the final list. That mattered because access to the procession was not social courtesy. It signaled trust, status, and closeness to the crown. Camilla, queen consort, turned from the front row and understood where every eye had shifted. She saw the future king staring past her toward the group linked to her private circle, and humiliation tightened across her face before anger replaced it. The queen demanded to know why the rehearsal had stopped. William answered without lowering his voice. He said the line had been altered, the approval process bypassed, and nobody would move until the change was explained. The silence deepened. A palace marshal stepped forward with the official entry ledger, the formal record showing who had permission to enter restricted ceremonial areas, and opened it beside the prince. William watched as the officer compared the approved page with the version now being used. Several names had been inserted in different handwriting after the final authorization stamp. Camilla looked toward the ledger, then toward her aides, but she did not deny recognizing the people waiting there at the doors. William's decision became immediate and absolute. He ordered security to close the entrance, remove the disputed guests, and suspend the rehearsal. The prince knew the command would embarrass Camilla, anger Charles, and send panic through the palace. But he also knew that allowing the line to advance would turn an unauthorized change into an accepted fact. Then an aide approached quietly. The official placed a second page in William's hand and pointed to a notation connected to Camilla's private office. The rehearsal had stopped in public, but the real confrontation would begin only after William discovered exactly who she had tried to place beside the crown. To the officials watching from the aisle, the dispute appeared to concern several unwanted guests. To William, it represented something far more dangerous: the quiet construction of a second royal court inside his father's reign. Each person in Camilla's circle carried a private connection, an unspoken expectation, or a history of access that had never been fully explained. Their presence in the coronation line turned a ceremonial rehearsal into a battle over belonging, legitimacy, and control. William studied the names again. The disputed group included one of Camilla's oldest social confidants, a private advisor with no formal ceremonial role, a family associate, and a communications figure who had begun appearing at increasingly sensitive royal gatherings. The formal procession, the ordered entrance of approved participants during the coronation ceremony, was supposed to represent the crown, not the private loyalties of one household. The prince had been trusted to protect that distinction, and he knew that once such access was accepted, it would become almost impossible to reverse. Camilla entered the side chamber without waiting to be invited. She removed her gloves slowly, one finger at a time, then placed them on the table and accused William of humiliating people who had stood beside her through years of hostility. The queen consort kept her voice controlled, but her hands trembled as she defended those relationships. To her, these were not opportunists. They were the few people who had remained loyal before royal acceptance brought comfort, ceremony, and public respect. William did not soften. He told Camilla that private loyalty could not become public authority simply because nobody wished to cause offense. The future king had watched family connections grow into institutional privileges before, and that memory shaped every word he chose. He feared that silence now would allow an unofficial court to form around his father, one favor at a time, until nobody could clearly separate personal influence from royal power. Charles III received the cancellation notice while standing alone beside his ceremonial robes. The king read his son's order twice, folded the page carefully, and asked the aide whether Camilla had personally approved the additions. When no clear answer came, Charles looked toward the closed door and understood that the conflict had moved beyond a guest list. Catherine, Princess of Wales, found William moments later and warned him that canceling the rehearsal would create enemies inside the palace. She knew the prince had acted from conviction, but she also knew wounded loyalty could become organized resistance. William answered that continuing the rehearsal would have made those enemies powerful. Then one name changed everything. That individual had already been linked to an earlier attempt to influence the coronation seating plan. The discovery pulled William back to a private ceremony months before, when Camilla's informal circle first crossed a boundary he had sworn they would never cross again. The cancelled rehearsal did not begin at the Abbey doors. Its true beginning came months earlier at a private Windsor dinner, when an apparently harmless seating change revealed how far Camilla's influence had already traveled. William arrived expecting an intimate family gathering, and found one of her closest advisors seated beside the king, holding a confidential briefing folder meant for senior working royals. Nobody challenged the arrangement that evening, but the prince never forgot the moment or the silence surrounding it. William noticed the folder before anyone spoke. The ceremonial briefing, a private planning document explaining procession order, family positions, restricted entrances, and the placement of senior relatives, rested beneath the advisor's hand as though it belonged there. Yet the guest had no official role and no reason to review material meant for working members of the royal family. The prince also saw that the chair belonged to Anne, whose expected place beside Charles had quietly been taken without explanation. Camilla watched William's expression change and tried to reduce the tension before it grew. She called it an informal dinner and said the seating arrangement meant nothing. The queen consort insisted her advisor was only helping her understand the demands ahead. William asked who had authorized access to the folder. She did not answer directly. Charles remained silent, and that silence carried more weight than any defense. Anne, Princess Royal, entered moments later and immediately understood what had happened. She looked at the occupied chair, then at the document on the table, but refused to create a public scene. The princess moved to the far end and sat down without protest. Before turning away, she exchanged one brief look with William. He saw no confusion in her face, only recognition. Anne knew the boundary had been crossed, and the prince knew she expected him to remember it. The unease deepened after dinner. A junior aide discovered the folder open beside a copying machine in the private office corridor. One page dealing with guest access had been removed, copied, and returned out of sequence. The aide documented the finding in a written account and reported it through the household chain, but no formal investigation followed. William learned of the incident the same evening, and his restrained anger hardened into suspicion. Catherine, Princess of Wales, found him outside the dining room. William told her that private influence could never be allowed to become official presence during the coronation. The princess watched as he wrote the advisor's name in a notebook and closed it with deliberate care. Months later, that same person appeared in the rehearsal entry line. William finally understood the Windsor dinner had never been harmless. It had been a test. Now the individual who had quietly occupied Anne's chair was waiting at the Abbey entrance, and the prince was ready to confront the woman who had placed them there. The confrontation took place behind a closed oak door, while the abandoned rehearsal schedule remained pinned outside. No courtiers stood between them. No music softened the silence. William placed the altered entry ledger on the table and pushed it toward Camilla. She did not look down. Instead, the queen consort met his eyes and accused him of turning a manageable misunderstanding into a public disgrace. His reply was quiet, controlled, and devastating. You had no right to change that line. William remained standing as Camilla moved closer to the table. The robing chamber, a private room where senior royals prepare before a major ceremony, had become the only barrier between their argument and the officials waiting outside. Charles stayed in the corridor with senior staff, while Catherine and Anne kept their distance. Inside, the prince placed the approved ledger beside the altered page and pointed to the notation from her private office. He wanted an answer, not another explanation hidden behind palace procedure. Camilla refused to accept his version of events. She said the people in question were never meant to join the sacred ceremony or claim royal status. They had been invited to observe, support her, and remain nearby during a day when she expected judgment from the public and tension within the family. The queen consort reminded William that those friends had stood beside her long before the palace offered respect. To her, their presence was an act of loyalty, not a seizure of power. William heard something far more dangerous. He told Camilla that she had converted private gratitude into ceremonial access, allowing personal relationships to enter a space governed by duty. The royal enclosure, the restricted seating area reserved for senior family members and officially approved guests, carried symbolic weight because every position suggested rank and acceptance. When she called his reaction cruel, the future king placed both palms on the table and said the greater cruelty was forcing Charles to choose between his wife and the crown. Camilla insisted that the king knew she wanted those people present. William immediately asked whether Charles had approved their placement in writing. She paused. That silence answered him before her words could. Then the prince revealed the second change. 2 seats near the royal enclosure had also been reassigned to members of her circle. Camilla looked down at last, and the anger in her face gave way to alarm. William opened the chamber door and instructed the waiting equerry, an officer who assists senior royals with formal duties, to bring Charles inside. The dispute could no longer remain private. When the king entered and saw the altered plans spread across the table, the coronation ceased to be a family celebration and became a test of his willingness to rule. Charles entered the chamber as a husband, a father, and a king, but he could not remain all three without disappointing someone. Camilla stood beside the window with her back partly turned. William remained at the table, refusing to move the documents or reduce the force of his accusation. For several painful seconds, Charles said nothing. Then he lifted the altered entry page, studied the unfamiliar handwriting, and realized that the rehearsal had exposed a struggle he had repeatedly postponed. Charles knew the decision rested with him. As sovereign, the reigning monarch with final authority over the crown's formal affairs, he could approve, reject, or suspend every coronation arrangement. Yet William had been trusted to protect the ceremony's structure and the role of the direct line of succession, meaning the family members legally closest to inheriting the throne. Supporting Camilla could legitimize unauthorized access. Supporting his son could humiliate his wife only days before the defining ceremony of their lives. Charles turned toward Camilla and asked why she had not brought the request to him directly. The king's voice carried no anger at first, only exhaustion. She answered that she had grown tired of asking permission for every person who had stood beside her before the palace accepted her. The queen consort said those people had endured the years when association with her brought criticism rather than privilege. Charles heard the pain in her words, but he also heard the admission beneath them. William refused to retreat. He told Charles that loyalty to one person could never become entitlement to the monarchy. The prince understood that every approved seat and every restricted entrance carried meaning beyond comfort. His father looked at him with visible hurt, knowing the argument touched older wounds neither man wanted to name. William saw that pain, but he did not withdraw the altered pages. Anne, Princess Royal, entered when Charles requested her account. She placed her printed ceremonial plan beside the ledger and showed that her assigned seat had been reassigned without consultation. The princess explained that the changes were not isolated mistakes. They matched the altered entry line and pointed toward one coordinated effort. Charles read both documents, then looked at Anne again. Her calm certainty removed the last room for denial. Charles set down his pen. He ruled that every unauthorized name and seating change would be removed, and the rehearsal would remain suspended until a new list passed joint verification, a process requiring several offices to confirm the same final version. Camilla gathered her gloves, faced the king, and said he had made his choice before the entire family. The king had settled the question of authority, but as Camilla walked away without looking back, the emotional cost of his ruling began spreading through the palace. Within an hour, the abbey had fallen silent. Music stands remained open, ceremonial chairs sat empty, and marked footsteps on the floor led nowhere. The cancellation moved through the palace faster than any official explanation could contain it. Camilla's circle was escorted away. Senior staff were ordered to surrender their previous schedules, and Charles returned to his private rooms alone. Yet the most painful image came elsewhere. Camilla sitting motionless before a mirror, while an attendant quietly removed the coronation jewelry she had rehearsed wearing. Security moved first. Every rehearsal pass was canceled, and officers began rechecking names, access routes, family links, vehicle permissions, seating cards, and requests from private royal offices. An accreditation review, a formal check confirming who is allowed into a restricted event, became the palace's public explanation. Staff repeated that phrase carefully. But inside the household, nobody believed this was a simple administrative delay. Everyone understood that William had challenged Camilla, and Charles had ruled against his wife. Camilla returned to her suite and dismissed most of her attendants. The queen consort removed one earring herself, then asked the remaining dresser whether anyone had defended her after she left the chamber. The woman hesitated before saying that the king had ended the discussion quickly. Camilla looked down at the jewelry prepared for the ceremony and understood the deeper wound. She had gained a crown, yet in that moment she felt more isolated than she had before the palace accepted her. Charles approached her rooms later, carrying no document and offering no official message. The king stopped outside the inner door, raised his hand, and almost knocked again. He knew his ruling had protected the ceremony, but he also knew it had confirmed Camilla's oldest fear, that when loyalty and institution collided, she would stand alone. Charles finally lowered his hand and walked away without speaking. The division spread immediately. 2 members of Camilla's office threatened to resign, claiming William had treated ordinary guest changes like a conspiracy. Another aide delivered a folder to palace security, containing additional access requests that had never reached the prince's team. The discovery suggested the disputed line was only part of a wider effort. Catherine found William alone in the empty rehearsal nave. The princess heard him admit that he had expected anger, but not the devastation on his father's face. She told William that stopping the rehearsal may have protected the crown, yet leaving the pain unspoken could divide father and son permanently. That evening, William went to find Charles not as the Prince of Wales defending protocol, but as a son confronting the damage his decision had caused. Long after the officials had left, William found Charles in a small private sitting room with no aides, folders, or ceremonial uniforms nearby. The king had loosened his tie and was staring at an untouched tray of tea. For the first time that day, neither man spoke as an office holder. William closed the door himself and remained standing until Charles finally asked the question hidden beneath every argument: "Did you stop the rehearsal to protect the crown or to punish her?" William did not answer immediately. He had deliberately left the altered ledger outside because he knew the conversation could not hide behind procedure again. An equerry, an officer who assists senior royals with formal duties, had offered to remain nearby, but the prince refused. No secretaries, lawyers, or family members would soften what needed to be said. This was no longer about paperwork. It was about a father who feared abandoning his wife, and a son who feared history repeating itself. William admitted that his anger had been personal as well as constitutional. The prince told Charles that seeing the Windsor advisor in the entry line had brought back every memory of private relationships, quietly shaping public decisions. He had watched boundaries move before, first through small favors, and then through expectations nobody dared challenge. William said the coronation could not begin with another decision being rewritten without consent. Charles listened without interruption. The king understood why his son distrusted informal influence, but he also explained what Camilla's circle meant to him. Those people had supported her during years of rejection, and their loyalty had helped steady both of them when public pressure became unbearable. Charles then made his own confession. He had repeatedly avoided challenging her requests because he feared making the queen consort feel abandoned at the very moment she was preparing to stand beside him. The truth finally emerged. Charles revealed through a recorded account from his private secretary that Camilla had requested observation access only. A senior member of her office had expanded that request into formal entry and seating privileges without securing written approval. The king admitted that his silence had allowed a personal wish to grow into presumed authority. William changed course, but not principle. He agreed that the rehearsal could resume the following morning if Camilla helped review the corrected list, rather than being publicly excluded from the process. The prince believed the boundary had to remain firm, yet he no longer wanted the queen consort treated as the enemy of the ceremony. Charles accepted the compromise, then delivered one final warning. The cancelled rehearsal had already reached the press. By sunrise, their private rupture would become a national spectacle. Father and son had found fragile understanding behind closed doors, but outside the palace gates, the world was preparing to decide who had been protected and who had been humiliated. By morning, one photograph had overtaken every explanation. It showed William standing in the center of the Abbey aisle, one hand raised, while Camilla turned from the royal enclosure with an expression of unmistakable shock. Behind them, the disputed entry line had stopped beneath the open doors. Newspapers, broadcasters, and crowds saw more than a rehearsal interruption. They saw the future king drawing a visible boundary around the monarchy, and the queen consort discovering that proximity to the crown did not guarantee control over it. William's decision now belonged to the public. Broadcasters described the cancellation as the most serious internal disruption since coronation rehearsals began, while commentators questioned why Charles had not intervened sooner. The royal enclosure, the restricted area reserved for senior members of the family and approved guests, became the center of the debate because every seat carried meaning. Camilla's disputed network was no longer a private concern. It had become evidence in a national argument about influence, authority, and the future direction of the crown. The palace responded with a short statement confirming that the rehearsal had been paused because of accreditation inconsistencies. Accreditation meant the formal process used to confirm who had permission to enter restricted areas. The statement promised revised arrangements, but avoided naming William, Camilla, or the altered list. That silence only increased suspicion. People understood that something larger than an administrative error had happened. Camilla sat alone at breakfast, as a broadcaster froze the photograph of William's raised hand beside her face. The queen consort watched for several seconds, then switched off the television and pushed the untouched newspaper away. She asked that no further press summaries be brought into the room. Camilla had spent years fighting for acceptance. Yet one image now suggested that the future king had publicly placed a limit on her power. Catherine, Princess of Wales, showed William the same front page. The prince studied it without speaking. He had stopped the rehearsal to prevent private influence from becoming royal privilege, but the coverage made his decision look like a personal attack on his father's wife. Catherine reminded him that symbols could become more powerful than facts. William understood that his raised hand had already become a verdict. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered around newspaper boards carrying the headline, "William stops the line." One woman lifted the front page toward television cameras and declared, "He did what the palace was too afraid to do." Others accused the prince of humiliating Camilla before the nation. By midday, the vehicles began returning to the abbey. Camilla arrived carrying the corrected entry list herself, while William waited inside. The world had turned their conflict into a symbol, but its final meaning would be decided when they met again in the same aisle. The second rehearsal began without fanfare. There were no disputed guests waiting beneath the doors, no altered seats near the royal enclosure, and no unofficial advisors carrying ceremonial papers. Camilla entered with Charles and paused when she reached William. For one suspended moment, everyone expected another confrontation. Instead, she handed him the corrected list. He checked the final page, returned it to her, and stepped aside. The music resumed, not because the conflict had been forgotten, but because its boundary had finally been understood. William reviewed the new arrangements with deliberate care. The jointly verified guest list, a final document checked and approved by several separate royal offices, carried authorization from the king's staff, the prince's team, security officials, and the ceremonial committee. Every late addition now required written consent. That mattered because no private household could quietly transform personal loyalty into official access again. And no single office could claim misunderstanding after the ceremony began. Camilla accepted the result without surrendering her dignity. Her private associates would not enter the procession, occupy senior family seating, or move through restricted preparation areas. They received limited observation places elsewhere, where their presence carried no ceremonial status. The queen consort remained wounded by the humiliation, yet she understood that members of her office had turned a request for emotional support into an institutional breach. By presenting the corrected list herself, she accepted the boundary publicly. William later spoke to Camilla in private. The prince did not apologize for stopping the rehearsal, because he still believed the decision had protected the crown. He did, however, apologize for allowing his anger to sharpen the confrontation and deepen her humiliation. She answered that she would remember two things: the line he defended and the way he chose to defend it. Neither offered easy forgiveness, but both accepted responsibility. Charles ended the uncertainty with a written royal directive, an official instruction governing how every household must act. The king ruled that no private office could independently alter coronation access, seating, procession order, or restricted entry. The decision applied equally to Camilla's household, William's team, and every other branch of the family. The truth was now clear. Charles understood that avoiding conflict had created the crisis. Camilla understood that devotion could not become royal privilege. William understood that constitutional firmness still carried a human cost. The cancelled rehearsal had not weakened the coronation. It had forced the monarchy to define who could stand near the crown and under whose authority. William protected the institution, Camilla accepted the limits of private influence, and Charles finally chose transparent order over emotional avoidance. The rehearsal ended with every person standing in the place formally assigned to them. The crown had survived disagreement because family loyalty stopped at the boundary of public duty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.